Emily, I'm going to hand over to you to start this discussion with Kieran about Marks and Spencer's. This icon, we love Marks and Spencer's. It's the place we go on the way home. And we found for the last few weeks that we've gone into this place which represents British treats and goodies. And we found that this is this sort of dystopian thing. Now, let's be clear. We're not talking about Summertown Marks and Spencer's, where there's a different level of service. They're serving a different clientele. We're talking about the Cowley Marks and Spencer's, which feels like a sort of emergency backup food bank for the last 3 weeks. Yes. Emily, what do you think? And over to you and Kieran on this.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I was actually impressed going into Marks and Spencer's yesterday, Kieran, that even in Cowley the shelves feel reasonably full, but online orders still paused. I mean, for people who might not be familiar with what a ransomware attack is, could you explain what ransomware actually means? And maybe also speculate or tell us what is known about what happened in Marks and Spencer's case.
Well, you wonderfully upmarket people in Summertown are clearly having easier experience than those of us who live in the surrounding villages and have to contend with the, unfortunately, rather struggling M&S at the train station, and particularly in this hot weather where it's been running quite short of water and other soft drinks. But nonetheless, ransomware classically is when a bunch of criminals get into a network and lock the network owner out of it, so it doesn't work. And if you think of the basic transactions of everyday digital life, the sort of thing we're doing now remotely, this emails, invoices, HR databases, all of the things that make an organization tick can be locked out. And the criminals are looking for a transaction. And that transaction is to sell you a key, a cryptographic key, to let you back in. And they charge for it. And it's in their interest to make it work. So in this absurd world of mostly Russian, in this case probably not Russian, interestingly, but mostly Russian criminality, they have dark websites with customer reviews telling you that the key works and so on. There are a couple of sort of modifications in terms of this story. One is it doesn't look like it's Russian. Another is that it's not a complete lockout. As you say, you're going into stores and things are there, and digital payments in store seem to have been unaffected entirely for the duration. It seems like staff are getting paid and other things that could be problematic. So it's a partial lockout. It's only some of the key servers. And the other thing is, we don't quite know what the ransom demand is and what it's for, but there's a secondary point, which is sometimes called ransomware, but purists like to call it extortion rather than ransomware, because it's about data theft, and where either instead of, or in this case, as well as locking you out of the network, they take some personal data, some customer data, or sensitive corporate data. Be personal data. In all cases it hasn't been, and they copy the data, send you some of it so they have it, and they essentially ask you to pay for a promise that they won't release it onto the dark web. So that's a different transaction. In the first transaction, they're asking you for a key, an actual product, and the absence of that key is causing real world direct damage to the business or the organization, because it can't do what it does on a day-to-day basis. In data extortion, if nothing else happens, the organization's working fine. All the networks are working as normal, but there's this sort of threat hanging over them, and you're asked to buy a promise from criminals rather than a product. So that's kind of what we mean by ransomware.
Now, going on to the attack itself, we hear that it's a method, it's a sort of this mixture when you're dealing with getting this very sensitive information. The speculation is that they used a combination of phishing attack and social engineering to actually get access to effectively a Marks and Spencer's engineer's phone.
Yeah.
And through SIM swapping, I'm just speculating about if I was going to do this, this is the type of thing I would do, because I know that our engineers here at Oxford Information Labs and the Global Signal Exchange, we are vetted in this security area, and we have extensive training around social engineering. But it's getting tough, isn't it, for the engineers?
Yeah, so being both a long-time government bureaucrat and now an academic, I couldn't start the answer without at least qualifying and picking at the question, Lucian. So, two things about that. One is, in terms of the data that was copied, and we might come back to this later, I would argue that it isn't actually that sensitive. But
Yes.
some of the data on the way in is sensitive, so we should come back to that. But the second caveat, and this is quite important, is that everything I'm about to say is essentially speculative because M&S haven't made an official statement about how it happened, and nor have the government or indeed anybody else. Now, there's a lot of rumor mill stuff, and a lot of it seems well sourced, and there's a lot of technical evidence available, but we have to caveat all of this by saying that the full picture may change in the course of time. But that notwithstanding, it does seem that there is a substantial direct sort of human technical hybrid aspect to this. The best indication of that is what my old organization, the National Cybersecurity Centre, did, because of course there are similar goings on at the Co-op and rumours about what's going on at Harrods. And so the NCSC put out this very good piece of guidance about how to make sure IT help desks didn't reset passwords for key systems administrators. And that advice came out on Easter Monday, a public holiday. And in my time at the NCSC, we didn't sort of randomly put out quite specific guidance about specific aspects of cyber attacks on public holidays. So you can make an inference that this had something to do with it. Added to that, a lot of the reporting suggests that somehow, whether it was SIM swapping, whatever, that bit's quite murky. They seem to establish a credible way of pretending to be a privileged access user, somebody who had control over large parts of the network.
And Emily, once you're a privileged access user, once you've got access to somebody's device, you have access really effectively to their personal accounts that they manage, but also, more importantly, the organisations that they're working for.
Yes, and you know, the phone is like this sort of ectopic brain. It's like the control centre for your whole life, isn't it? And so if you can get hold of somebody who has that privileged access device, you then have a way into anything that they have the ability to access. Kieran, I wanted to pick up on... Well, there's so much to talk about here, but you were talking about how crazy it is that, you know, the different exploits or the different gangs have review sites on the dark web. And also there was an incident, I think yesterday, Joe Tidy of the BBC was reporting that he was contacted by one of the alleged criminals who was bragging about what they had done or not done to the Co-op, and showing this journalist, a BBC journalist, apparently evidence of their criminality. I mean, in what world do criminals actually proactively contact journalists to claim responsibility for a crime and show evidence of criminality? Doesn't that speak to the culture of impunity and the fact that really no criminals in cybercrime get prosecuted or ever go to jail? Is this a satisfactory position?
Well, there's all sorts of things to unpack there, and just briefly going back to how they got in and the social engineering aspect of this, I think one of the things that is unusual about this is that clearly there may well have been not just very good phishing emails, maybe AI generated and so forth, but actual conversations between human beings and criminals and an IT help desk to persuade them to do this. And as you were saying, Emily, you know, with the privileged access user, and we tell organizations this all the time when we're doing cyber training, you know, the chief executive is not the most useful person. It's the person who holds the key.
I can definitely endorse that.
I think to do anything at all, Kieran.
To do anything, actually.
As a former public sector CEO, I heartily endorse that. I would everybody to work for me. But anyway, so on this impunity point and the whole sort of ludicrous situation we find ourselves in with these things are marketing, I think that unlike other parts of crime, the ransomware people actually sort of need a brand because this is all about fear. And if you can stoke up fear through the attack, but then sell the reassurance with all these validations of previous payers who got out of digital jail, then that can incentivize boards and corporate leaders and others to pay. So it's in their interest to have these brands and so forth. It's also, frankly, the case, I think we know enough about the ransomware crews over the years to surmise that quite a few of them have quite big egos and quite enjoy the attention and so forth. I mean, they tend to be young men who would be susceptible to that sort of thing. But there's a big geographic problem in this. Now, this might not be the case in the Marks and Spencers and Co-op hacks because they appear to be native speakers of English. There are rumours that they're affiliated to this weird and quite disparate group, sometimes known as Scattered Spider, who carried out the hacks of two big casinos in Las Vegas in 2023. And one of those leaders is awaiting trial. One of the alleged leaders is awaiting trial in California, having perhaps been a bit too obviously living the high life in Spain and attracting the attention of the authorities. So there's a chance, more than an outside chance, that in this case you would have that rarity, which is the imprisonment of a serious cyber criminal. But we are talking from Oxford. So the Department of Sociology here at the University of Oxford published the first sort of study of the geography of cybercrime last year. And it will surprise nobody that in terms of its heat map, out on its own, with a dark shade all by itself, was Russia, home of an estimated 75% of ransomware. And the thing is, never mind current relations with Russia, where obviously we're not going to do any law enforcement cooperation. The Russian constitution, I checked this yesterday because it's just such a strong thing, I wanted to make sure it's right, and it is. The Russian constitution prohibits the extradition of its own citizens.
Right.
So unless a Russian leaves Russian territory, they will never face justice in any other country. And what's unique about cybercrime, it's very common in policing to talk about, well, cybercrime is just another form of crime. No, it's not. Because, and this is crucial, you don't have to set foot in British territory in order to harm Britain. And in, say, global terrorism, you could do all the plotting abroad, all of it. But somebody somewhere had to either be in Britain or arrive in Britain to do something, and that would provide some interdiction or at least apprehension after the event opportunity. None of that happens here. So I think both in terms of the scale and the jurisdictional problem, it actually sort of breaks our model of policing, because if you're a well brought up British citizen, you think, well, I have two expectations of the police if I'm the victim of a crime. One is I'll be taken seriously and sympathetically as a victim. And the second is the police will pursue the perpetrators with a decent chance of bringing them to justice. Neither of those hold here because of the scale of cybercrime, the numbers, there's millions and billions depending on how you categorize events. There's no conceivable way you could scale up policing to deal with these things.
This is too much fun.
Yeah.
I really, really want to dig into this. And Emily and I studied this at MBA, where we were taught actually strategy by a former policeman who did strategy in the police. And he said in 1970, you'd be in a car chase and they'd be chasing the criminal, and they'd have to stop at the border of their jurisdiction and phone up and hand over to the next police service across the border. And they unlocked so much being able to go across borders. And we find, Emily, with the global signal exchange, we are now trying to break down those barriers and work cooperatively and internationally, but it's a huge challenge. Kieran, I'm just going to wrap on this because we're eating up the precious time that we have with you. I just wanted to turn the focus slightly, just briefly, on Marks and Spencers, their staff and the recovery. I don't sense that large checks are being written here and a big load of cryptocurrency is being shifted out of Marks and Spencers to pay these. I get the sense, would you agree, disagree, that they're kind of trying to build their own new systems. They've paused online orders, which is a colossal operation for a few weeks now, which is a huge impact on their share price. And also a lot of their just-in-time suppliers have said, we've been told to just send stuff to Marks and Spencers, even if it seems to have hit badly their orders system, but it seems that their suppliers are helping them out. I just a few words from you on how that, back to them, the victims of this crime and their customers.
Well, first of all, Lisa, I'm very disappointed because when you said you were going to rap on this, I thought you meant in the Eminem Jay-Z sense rather than moving on. So I was great.
There's some AI coming up on that. I tell
don't
you.
say that with Igor and Charlie around, because the next thing we'll see is
me doing a rap
Lucian
song
as a rapper.
Excellent. Well, look, I can't say for sure whether or not M&S have paid or considered paying. There are some cases where people pay and the key doesn't work, but I think it looks more likely than not that they haven't paid. And I think there's an important point here about supporting them in that decision. It is easy and very common, particularly in the United States, for people to pay their way out of trouble, and all that means is more of it comes. So if they have taken this brave decision and it comes out in the fullness of time, I think they deserve credit because they have taken one for Team UK by showing that British companies perhaps are not as susceptible to pay as some in other countries. And if that happens at scale, then you should see a behavioral shift by the criminals. So therefore, it's good that suppliers are helping them out. It's good that people are mitigating. I think there is just a lesson from this, and it's a worrying one. Somebody who tries to be realistic about the cyber threat, but you started this conversation by talking about the iconic brand and the disruption and so forth. And it turns out it's not proved that difficult for a bunch of semi-organized criminals to take out an iconic UK brand. Now, joking aside, we can live without M&S for a few weeks, or at least partial functioning. Other alternatives are available. But this is a playbook not just for cyber criminals, it's a playbook for anybody who would want to harm the UK. Sometimes, and I hate the way this sort of sounds, but because it sounds so amoral, but sometimes sort of the big nation states suffer from the same sort of obsession with the spectacular that global terrorists have done in the past. They're always obsessed with sort of trying to do something really difficult, like take out aircraft, whereas they could cause mayhem and sometimes did by simpler, but less, if you like, from their twisted point of view, glamorous attacks. Sometimes big nation states, cyber criminals have fixated on really difficult things like power grids and TV stations, which are really hard to do.
Yes.
You can do a lot of damage to the UK just by messing up loads of organizations at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's why, the whole point, and I'm sure M&S will be doing lots of learning from this, and so should other organizations, the whole point about how you recover and how you limit the damage in the first place and then recover is absolutely crucial.